welcome to Common Sense Medicine.
Yes.
It's a new health podcast that is evidence-based, trying to get information out to people so that they better understand their health.
That's right. Just trying to make regular medical knowledge more common.
Yeah, and I think, after we've been seeing patients for a while, we realize that's what people need. They just need more information to better understand their health so they can make better educated decisions for their health.
That's right.
Go ahead. You are Melissa Wood.
That's right. Family nurse practitioner with additional certification in lifestyle medicine.
Which is awesome. And I am Tim Chen. I'm a family physician that has big interest in public health and evidence-based medicine.
That's right.
Now, again, this podcast is just, I guess, disclaimer time, right? This is just a podcast for medical information. This is not medical advice personalized for people because we don't know what people are going through.
That's right. That's right. So if you have any questions, any concerns, definitely consult with your provider before implementing anything new.
Perfect. So now that's out of the way, we're going to get into today's podcast.
Let's do it.
Hey, Melissa.
Hey.
How are you?
Good.
Yeah?
Good.
How's this week?
It's been great. Yeah.
It's been great. We've had really good success with patients this week. A lot of patients came back. Numbers look better. They've been trying and putting forth effort, and I'm excited.
Yeah. Seeing lots of good results all around.
Yeah. We must be doing something right. And I think it's because of our podcast.
Maybe. Or maybe the patients are doing their part too.
There you go. Yeah. It's a partnership. And that's kind of the whole point of our podcast is to help equip patients so that they can better engage their health so that they can really be effective in our partnership together.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, today, Melissa, going along in the heart disease world, high blood pressure.
Yes. That's a very relevant topic for this month, Heart Health Month. High blood pressure, I think we saw accounts for 30% of cardiac related deaths.
Yeah.
So it's pretty high.
Yeah, it's actually right. The number one problem in the world is high blood pressure, number one killer. Which is funny because I always thought diabetes, but I guess the rest of the world doesn't struggle with diabetes like we do here. But high blood pressure, definitely a thing that happens when we age, but there's things we can do about it. Yeah. So today we'll be talking about, what defines high blood pressure, right? How do you know you have it? And then what do you do if you do have it? How do you fix it? Well, how do you monitor it? We'll talk about blood pressure cuffs, and then we'll wrap up with how to fix it through lifestyle or things like that. In addition to maybe a couple of myths that people associate with blood pressure that maybe we need to clarify.
Yeah. I think those are where the common sense medicine comes in. It feels like people should know, and there are lots of myths around that I think we just need to get the word out.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get into it today, Melissa. So, Melissa, let's start with definition. What does it mean when someone says, I have high blood pressure, or your doctor says you have high blood pressure?
So yeah, we start looking at the numbers. The gold standard for years and years was always 120/80. You've probably heard that, seen that. Somebody has mentioned that to you. Usually though, when we start talking about, do we need to treat this with medication? We're looking at numbers, 140/90 or higher. A lot of times when you're in that gray area between the 120/80 and the 140/90, like, 130s or so, a lot of times it starts with just lifestyle modification. You're still considered to have, I guess, high blood pressure at that point, but it's treated more often than not with just lifestyle modifications and monitoring.
Exactly. That's exactly right. So, if you go to the doctor and you have a blood pressure of 140/90, the first thing you probably want to do is just confirm that actually is happening. Now, if you go to the doctor because you got shot, which we've had patients come in with bullets, or you have a boil that you need cut, or you're sick and you took a bunch of decongestants. All those things can raise it, right? So oftentimes we don't treat on the very first blood pressure unless it's astronomically high, like 190 over 100. But yeah, once you go above that, then the next point is to try to talk about, hey, is this truly a thing? Is it just a one-off? And this is when it's helpful maybe to even get some readings outside the clinic, right? And so, yeah.
Right. Yeah. What we see in the office is such a small picture of what someone's blood pressure is actually doing. And so a lot of times we'll recommend some home monitoring and get some readings that are from outside of the office and see if that correlates to what we're seeing in the office. And then we can make a better decision on whether we need medication or even adjusting medications.
Perfect. Well, then that kind of brings us to that first question. Because you're exactly right, Melissa. The American Academy of Family Physicians, American Academy of Cardiology, more and more academies are relying on home readings because A, it's easy to get a home cuff now. And B, right, we're only getting one snapshot in time of your blood pressure. And again, like I said, your kids could have been screaming, you're in I-55 traffic, you're going through Jackson hitting potholes and you popped a tire. All those things will raise blood pressure. So now with you can get a cheap cuff on Amazon. That has really become a staple in how we monitor blood pressure, which, Melissa, so this is the first question I had a patient ask me. Wrist cuff or arm cuff?
Arm cuff all the way. Yeah. The wrist cuffs can be less accurate. It's very dependent on user position. And so there's a wide area for error. So it's definitely more accurate to get the upper arm cuff.
Awesome.
And typically the automated cuffs are best. They do sell the manual kits out there, but that usually takes some basic medical training to know what you're listening for and make sure you get an accurate reading. Plus, if you're monitoring your own blood pressure and don't have anybody to do that for you, it's real difficult to get a manual blood pressure at home. So, and that's for people that don't know, a manual blood pressure is where, you see somebody put on the stethoscope, they listen for the reading. The automated is the one where you put it on your arm and hit the button and it does it for you.
That's exactly right. And so we endorse, not that we're sponsored by anybody, but we endorse the arm cuffs because you want accurate numbers, right? So, putting it, a right size cuff, that's really important. Making sure you're not getting one that's too big or too small. Putting it not over a jacket, but ideally right on the skin. That makes the machine, make it a little bit more accurate for the machine. And how do you check it, Melissa? So some people ask me that, like, do I check it first thing in the morning? Do I need to sit there? Do I get out of bed? What is the ideal way to check your blood pressure?
Yeah, so I usually tell people especially if we're trying to decide what their blood pressure average is, I'll usually tell them to get a couple readings at different times of the day. Usually a good time, and I guess I should say, you shouldn't, be running and then sit down and check your blood pressure.
That's right.
Give yourself 5 minutes to just sit, check it. And it can be at varying times of the day, just to get a pretty good average, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. I would say, both feet on the floor. Give yourself a second, right? Don't check it after you've been yelling at the kids because it's going to be high. Usually the rule of thumb is 5 minutes. Most of us don't have 5. Well, we don't think we do because then the baby's like outside and then the neighbors are looking at you funny. So, but yeah, at least give yourself a minute to take some deep breaths, calm down, then check it. And it's not, it's actually pretty good to just check it a couple of times. All throughout the day, give you a good idea of what your blood pressure is doing. And if it's great at home, let's say you're in the office, it was 140/90, you got a cuff, you went home, you checked it, it's 121/80 nonstop, multiple times a day, then we can actually safely assume, okay, those are just a one-off, we're fine. However, Melissa, if we start realizing that, hey, it is 140/90 or even higher at home, it's 150/90, then that means you probably should not ignore it, but actually talk to your physician.
Yes. Don't wait until your next regular checkup, especially if, your next regular visit is 6 months out. If you're seeing consistently elevated readings, especially above that 140/90 range, go ahead and make an appointment. You can even bring your cuff in, review the readings. You can compare your cuff to the cuff in the office, make sure you're getting accurate readings. So coming prepared to your visit like that can be really helpful in allowing your doctor to have all that information to make the decisions that he or she needs to make whether starting medication or going a different route.
Exactly. And I'll just put a little, I guess doctor, practitioner pet peeve maybe. Give us actual numbers. All right.
Don't say, oh, it's been normal. It's been good. Or, oh, it's been high. Okay. What is the number? Yeah, we just need a number.
Exactly. People are like, yeah, it's good. I was like, what's good to you? I don't know, or, and then I was like, oh, it's about what you saw. It's good. And I'm like, I see 145 over 95. And they're like, oh, that's not good. So, give us the numbers. And with cell phones and smartphones, it's so easy to just snap a photo, right? All right, bring your cuff, or write it down. And so when we have accurate numbers, that gives us a better idea of what we can do to control it.
Yeah, there's apps and all kinds of things where you can log your numbers and just pull them up. A lot of cuffs even sync to your phone, so you can just pull it up and show us. But I will say, and I guess on the topic of checking things at home, don't stress over it too much. If you get maybe a borderline high reading, check it again the next day and see where you're at. But I have seen patients get really anxious about it and check it many, many times throughout the day and analyze every little change. Well, it went from 125 to 130. And then, it's normal to have some minor fluctuations. It's normal. So don't stress over it too much.
There you go. You're right. Because we've definitely seen people where they get so stressed out that it gets higher and higher because they're getting more and more stressed. So, little fluctuations. In fact, I had a patient yesterday. It was 124 over 80 in the office. And he said, that's what I see at home. But sometimes I'll see a 135. And you're like, it's okay. It's okay to fluctuate a little bit because life fluctuates a little bit. So, it doesn't have to be 120 no matter whether you just came back from the gym, whether you're sitting in a recliner. It fluctuates as long as it comes down when you're relaxed. That's what we're concerned about. Yes. Now, Melissa, let's move on. Medications. Because this is so important because this happened like 4 times this week. Blood pressure medicine, whatever your practitioner decides to do, right? They have their benefits. If you're consistently high, bringing it down can definitely help. Now, sure, it's not the end all be all. Some people, after they get on blood pressure medicine, they start eating better, they lose weight, they start exercising, blood pressure goes down. We'll be happy to pull them off. But a common myth is that once I take the medication for 30 days, 90 days, and I run out, I can stop.
Yeah, a lot of people, I think, don't realize that, by the end of that bottle, there's usually refills on there, and they're there for a reason. And if you ever are unsure if you're supposed to continue a medication, it's not a silly question. Just ask. Don't wait until your next 3-month follow-up or whatever to ask if you should continue this medication. Those questions aren't silly, So, but in most cases, if your provider starts you on a blood pressure medication, continue that unless you have a conversation with them that, tells you to stop. Okay. So there are, like you said, some cases where somebody needs to come off. Or if you're having side effects from the medication, don't just stop the medication and wait 6 months and then talk about it. Let your doctor know, and they most likely can find you something else that works just as well for blood pressure, but maybe not the same side effect profile. Exactly. And so that's essentially our little plug. The common sense plug is don't just, first of all, don't start something without asking us, right? Meaning, like, I have patients like, I have high blood pressure. My aunt has high blood pressure. Just give me her medication. Don't do that. Don't just start it. And on the flip side, don't just stop it either. So, and we are always happy to answer those questions, right? Sometimes people will say, I had a procedure, so I just stopped it anyway. We can tell you if that's something you need to stop it for or not. But the medicine, we put it on there for a reason. And when we feel like it's time for it just to come off and we have a conversation, we can decide together if it's appropriate to come off. But correct. Side effect, let us know. Don't just stop. Yeah. And probably one other that we saw this week, it was a matter of insurance coverage changed and he wasn't sure if he'd be able to get his medicine or not, didn't even attempt to refill it, just assuming that it would probably be very expensive while his insurance had lapsed. And, really blood pressure medicines now, there's a boatload that are less than $4, cash price, So most blood pressure medications are pretty affordable. And even the ones that are a little bit higher, if you ever get in a situation where you can't afford one of them, there are other options. So definitely don't hesitate to talk to your doctor about that too.
Perfect. All right. Well, Melissa, let's talk about then lifestyle stuff, right? Because blood pressure, of course, some people will say, well, it's genetic. There's nothing I can do. But in fact, there's a lot we can do. And so there are lists of what we call modifiable risk factors. We talked about this last week. What are things that we can change that can affect blood pressure negatively, and if we fixed it, would help with our blood pressure?
Right. There's lots of things. So, and the things that we talk about probably every week, of course, diet, exercise, stress management, sleep. A lot of people don't realize that alcohol reduction can help. So if someone has some high blood pressure, even borderline high blood pressure, if you're consuming alcohol on a regular basis, that's one potentially easy fix, just reducing that. Also, tobacco reduction or cessation, salt reduction, that kind of ties in with diet, weight loss, which kind of follows if you're doing all those other things, exercising and watching your diet. But even without weight reduction, a lot of these things can be beneficial. So independent of any change in weight, if you do some of these other things, we can still see blood pressure reduction without weight loss.
Perfect. Yeah, you're exactly right. Some of these things, obviously weight going down, blood pressure usually goes down because there's a bunch of hormones that change when weight goes down. But you're right, like cutting back alcohol is really, really a big one. I would say much bigger player since the pandemic, because I think so much people have just drank more because they're at home all day. And so if you are going through a time where maybe your doctor's trying to figure out why they can't control the blood pressure on 3 medicines, 4 medicines, sometimes alcohol is a big one. So cutting that back, that's a big one. Tobacco, there's nothing more to talk about tobacco, right? We know it raises blood pressure. We know it's just bad. There's no benefit for tobacco. And so cutting that back or cutting that out will make a big difference on blood pressure and your health in general. One that I've heard, and talking about diet now, salt, right? So we talk about that. Salt is a big issue. And so this is myth number 2. So myth number 1 is about the medication. Myth number 2, Melissa, a lot of people will tell me, I don't put any salt in my food, so I'm good. But unfortunately, there's a lot of food that already has plenty of salt in it.
Yes. And most of the foods that we eat in the standard American diet are going to have sodium in them already because they're prepackaged, heavily processed. Any of those foods can potentially be high in sodium. And those are things that maybe people don't realize. A lot of people don't realize things like lunch meat, cheeses, bread, cereal, sodas, all these things that you may not think about. What are some other ones?
Bread and rolls. Right? Chicken,
pizza.
soups.
Yeah, with all the salty meat and cheese, soups. Yes, that's another big one.
Right. Snack food like potato chips and pretzels. Right. These things, right. You haven't put any salt on them per se, or you don't cook salt with this stuff, but a lot of them already have a lot of salt content in them, especially if you eat out. Right. If you eat at a restaurant, you eat at fast food, there's just no telling what's in your food. And so those can be really sneaky areas of sodium that maybe you don't realize you're doing, but if you cut that back, that will actually really help with the blood pressure.
Yes. And even when you're cooking, there are sneaky sources of sodium, sauces and condiments. Also things like garlic salt. It's still salt.
It's on there, yeah.
Sea salt is still salt. Himalayan sea salt
and it's pink.
is still salt, so you're still going to get sodium from those things.
Yeah. I always wonder how they make it pink.
I don't know. I think is
It
that
like
the
that?
color of the actual
Of the Himalayas. We need to do a recording in the Himalayan mountains,
we
Melissa.
need to learn more about that.
Yeah.
There's salt rooms. Have you seen that?
I have.
We'll have to do, we need to do an episode on some of these like alternative things.
That's right. Next time we'll do is like a episode where we're jumping in an ice bath.
Yes,
like,
ice bath,
oh my
salt
gosh.
cave. Yeah.
Yeah. No, you're exactly right. So obviously that's a big area for people to be, to kind of watch. Another thing talking about food and dietary things is, well, I guess before moving there, Melissa, so let's say I like the salty taste, but I know I can't put salt in. What are maybe some substitutes that we can use?
Yeah, there are a lot of different seasonings and I don't know, I guess we can say brands, but Mrs. Dash is one that has a pretty good variety of sodium-free seasonings, all different flavors. That's another thing to watch, though, as you're seasoning your veggies or your meats or things like that. Even if you're not putting salt, a lot of the seasonings have a lot of salt in there. So maybe it's your Cajun seasoning or the rub for your whatever you're putting on the grill. A lot of those things are filled with salt. So when you're looking for seasonings, really kind of pay attention to the ingredients and the salt content. You can still get lots of good flavor without the salt.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So Mrs. Dash, if you want to sponsor us now. But yeah, you're exactly right. There are other things you can do, like even just doing maybe garlic powder versus garlic salt, or onion powder, or other things like that. And you can be creative. But right. And sometimes, you know what, maybe we just don't need to eat things with that much flavor to it. We can eat it a little blander. And it's so funny. I mean, when I went to Taiwan, they gave us, this is not salt, this is not sugar, but, they gave us a cake for birthday and they're like, oh, be careful. It's really sweet. And I was like, what? I remember, I heard be careful, it's hot, but be careful, it's sweet. And I was like, well, that's kind of weird. And when you ate it, it's like, well, it's just fruit. It's not sweet. But because they have so little sugar in their diet, to them, the taste buds adjust, right? And so same with us. Like we can train our taste buds not to have like this much salt to feel like it's satisfying. Yeah. Another one, Melissa, talking about food and diet is caffeine. So whereas maybe like people think about drinking coffee, it doesn't, drinking coffee it'll raise your blood pressure temporarily. But that is something to consider. I mean, more than coffee now, energy drinks like Monster, I guess that's a brand. Sorry, Monster. Like energy drinks, loaded teas. I mean, these things are chock full of caffeine that can really raise blood pressure and maybe give you a false reading of it being high.
Yeah. Sometimes, if someone is drinking, sweet tea would be another one. High caffeine. All day long. They started their day with a cup of coffee and now they've been sipping on tea most of the day or an energy drink in the middle of the afternoon. That could contribute to some increase in blood pressure and also probably anxiety.
I actually had a patient who thought he had panic attacks. Literally went to psychiatry, the whole 9 yards. So he went to an endocrinologist. And they were trying to rule out this rare disease called FeO, which is a super rare blood pressure flushing disease. And the endocrinologist was actually smart enough to be like, do you drink caffeine? And they're like, oh, I drink 2 Monsters every morning. And once they stopped it, the blood pressure went away, the panic feeling went away, the anxiety went away. He could come off all his anxiety medications. But it's amazing what things that we do in our daily life that we don't think about actually are pretty detrimental to how we feel.
Yeah, a lot of people just don't put 2 and 2 together. They don't realize that they're closely connected.
Yeah. All right, Melissa, a couple more myths, and I think we should probably wrap it up. This one is very interesting because I have a lot of patients that come in and tell me, I feel my blood pressure, right? And sometimes it's hard to know if your blood pressure is going up and you feel something or you're feeling something and your blood pressure is responding, right? You feel anxiety, your hands start sweating, your face is flushing. The blood pressure is actually responding to that feeling versus the other way around. But there's a reason the blood pressure is called a silent killer.
Yeah. Most people don't feel it. A lot of times it's a surprise to someone when they come in and find that their blood pressure is elevated. I would say it's a lot more rare for somebody to have a headache or blurred vision or some other occasional signs that we hear of and then check their blood pressure and it's high. I think it's definitely more common that people have no idea.
Yeah. Yep. And I think the final myth, kind of rolling along that, is that I'm young. I don't have to worry about my blood pressure, right? Because we have a lot of young people, especially in Mississippi, that already have signs of high blood pressure because they've been dealing with diabetes or obesity or some, high cholesterol and blood pressure. They kind of run together like the four horsemen, I guess. But, to really emphasize, blood pressure, most of the time, it's a problem for people in the future because they never addressed it earlier. Like it's a subtle kind of long-term battle because you don't feel it coming.
Right. Maybe somebody has their first checkup at 45 and they have high blood pressure. Surprise. But it probably has been ongoing for many years. It may have started as a 130 over 76 at age, 30, and it has just steadily progressed over time. And they just never realized it, never felt it. And so when they get that first checkup, they have high blood pressure.
Right. Exactly. And so I guess that's, in anything that we deal with, diabetes, high blood pressure, obesity, the shorter you have that problem, the easier it is to reverse. And what I mean by that, if you've been dealing with high blood pressure for like 20 years, it's actually kind of hard to reverse it then. If you've been dealing with blood pressure problems for maybe the first 6 months or first year and we discover it, we can actually reverse that pretty easily. Same with diabetes. And so that's why getting those yearly checkups, doing your wellnesses, and if you have problems following up and being kind of diligent on it is actually really, really helpful for the future. I tell my patients all the time, like, we can make you live to 65 pretty much with all the medications and things and the technology and the heart caths and things like that we have. But it's the difference between living to 65 on maybe one medication, still fully independent, going to grandkids' graduations, walking up and down football, stadiums with kids, enjoying life, or being 65 on 8 medications because we have, 2 heart attacks, had a stroke. That actually can all be fixed if we start early.
Right. Like the 28-year-old that comes in who has maybe just a little bit elevated, maybe right there, like I said, the 130 over 70 range, but they've had, 2 energy drinks and a cigarette before they came in. That's the perfect time to intervene and to give that 28-year-old some information on how do we modify these factors now to prevent that from progressing into that 65-year-old on 8 meds and a heart attack, stroke.
Exactly. Yeah. So this episode is actually really appropriate for a lot of people, right? Because this is essentially the whole point of our clinic that we work at is to try to figure out how to prevent these things from happening. And it's hard to do just once a year visit or once every 6 months, but hopefully these weekly podcasts kind of motivate some people just to not, your health doesn't be your end all be all, but just move it up the priority list just a little bit. Yeah. Well, Melissa, any final thoughts, any wrap up thoughts that you have?
I think that covers a lot. Definitely talk with your provider if there's any question about whether you do have high blood pressure and need to start home monitoring. There is a website that you can see if you have a good home cuff.
Oh, okay.
I need to make sure I get it right. It is validatebp.org. So if you're thinking about getting a cuff, you can go there, see which cuffs are accurate and validated. That way you know that you're getting accurate readings at home. And if you're not sure at any point, you can always bring your cuff to your appointment, compare it to what you get in the doctor's office, and see if you're getting accurate readings at home.
Perfect. And don't forget to take your medication if you're on it. Don't just start and stop on a whim. And we're always happy to answer those questions for you or our patients, I guess, if you come see us. And of course, the last point is there are a lot of things we can do to prevent high blood pressure from causing an issue down the road. Genetics is a very, very small role. Most of it is lifestyle modification, and we can make that better.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, Melissa, next week will actually be a fun one. What to do when you eat out.
Oh, yes. That's a good one.
Yeah. I think everybody's, we're struggling with trying to figure out what to do when you eat out. And there are a lot of hidden things. I'm trying to get some guests on here, but if not, we actually have PowerPoints and slide decks. But I think that will be a good one because I feel like every single parent, especially with soccer season starting, these are things to really pay attention to.
Yeah. Yeah. Everybody needs to know how to be able to grab a relatively healthy meal on the go. Everybody's busy. So that's helpful.
Yeah. And I'll just throw a little piece out there. Queso is not good for you. A little bit, it's okay.
Unfortunately.
Unfortunately. All right, well, Melissa, we'll do it again next week.
All right.